Welcome to the latest edition of Extraordinary Stories from Ordinary People. Today my guest is a local man, Guy. My first meeting with Alan was a bit unusual. Our church had organised a meeting of local church and group leaders to share and pray about our plans to run Alpha courses in the area. On the night of the meeting, before the proceedings had started, this young man walked in and sat beside me. So I asked him, "What church do you belong to?" To which he replied, "I don't go to church. I've just come along because I saw this prayer meeting advertised online and I want to listen to what people are saying and to hear what they're praying about." Well, I guess that was about 10 years ago, Alan, and we have met many times since, but it's nice to have you with me here again today. And we look forward to hearing about your experience with God.
The encounter with God that I would like to share about today is my encounter with God through weakness. It's probably better to describe it as encounters with God, because I've found at various points in my life that I have encountered God in a more profound way during times of weakness rather than times of strength. It's a bit of a paradox, of course, but one I think that echoes the Bible when we read of God's strength through weakness. And we also read that the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. And I think the first time that I encountered this divine principle, if you want to call it that, was in my early 20s, when my life was well off track and I was destroying myself through my behaviour and my actions. And I was leading a bit of a rogue existence, really, where I lived contrary to even the basic guidance that God gives for all human beings. And I think that I encountered God in my weakness because I remember at the time spending a few years basically trying to sort myself out. I spent a few years trying to change my behaviour and trying to fix my life. And it was all to no avail. And often I poured all my strength and my energy into change, and it was all the strength I could muster. But it never actually happened in a concrete way. I always returned to the same habits and behaviours, and they were all highly destructive. And that is, of course, until one day I was introduced to the idea of asking God to do it for me, rather than me doing it on my own and based on my own strength and energy. Now, remarkably, I found that by doing this and looking to God, change did occur. A weight was lifted from my shoulders. I stopped trying to run the show. It became easier for me to live in a different manner, and the old destructive behaviours and habits that ensnared me became less of an issue in my life. So I think that experience helped me when it came to encountering Jesus himself through the gospel message. Because through the gospel I became aware of wider sin issues in my life. And perhaps the most obvious one was my tendency to put myself at the centre of things rather than Jesus Christ. You could say I became more aware of my tendency toward Babalism. By this point in my life I was well aware that I was the kind of guy that liked to build a tower, make a name for myself, run the show and be at the centre of things. And the gospel message began to pinpoint this sin in a deeper way, and also helped me to recognise my need of forgiveness before God. Because I think the gospel really put into words something that I intuitively knew and something that I had experienced, and that was that my sin deserved some sort of judgment. So having had that previous experience, I could see the value in recognising my sin and my limitations and my need to look not to myself as if I can save myself or deal with all the complex issues that come from sin, but to look to Jesus and his work on the cross on my behalf. And I found again that it was at that weaker point of simple confession and faith that I warmed to Christ in a way that I hadn't before in my life. There was a joy and a pleasure in Christ that lifted my spirits beyond anything that I could muster on my own, and I at least began a journey of following him and not myself. So then I began to find this principle developing in my life in a number of areas, and perhaps in a more mundane way. Over the years I've been involved in a variety of ministries, and I found that in almost everything I did there was fear and nerves and weakness. I found that to be the case in the real world as well, when people are honest enough to share it. For years, for example, I played the drums in church, and when I started, if you knew what was going on in my stomach, you would have thought I was running for mayor. And it was the same for other things, whether it was being involved in running the church football team, or running outreach events, or speaking at a church service, praying publicly, or even speaking to people one-on-one. I also went to Bible college, and one of the reasons why I didn't really share it with others for a while was because I felt it was the place for real theologians, and that it wasn't really for somebody like me. And in fact, it wasn't until I got there that I found out that actually we're all off our head, so that was a relief when I got to Bible college. So these experiences were marked by what we sometimes perceive as weaker aspects of human nature, things like fear, nerves, and particularly a sense of inadequacy. However, when I was in that zone and I decided to trust God and still go ahead with what I thought He was doing in my life, even with all my weakness, things generally worked out, and often things worked out in ways that I wouldn't have expected. In other words, I encountered God, and I believe that my weaknesses helped me to see and experience God's strength rather than being a barrier to it. Now, in recent years, I think I've been relearning what it is to encounter God afresh in my weaknesses. Recently, I had a number of big changes in my life that came all at once, and they unsettled me. The first thing was that I switched church, and that was a big change for me after 10 years. Part of that switch was starting a brand new job, working for the church that I moved to, a job where, with all my learning and training, i.e. with all the strength you glean from Bible college, I'm supposed to know what to do. But in reality, I started on day one and just thought to myself, what on earth am I doing? I have no idea where to start here. And I think the church as well has been through a fair bit of transition, and we're still going through that change, and all of that contributes toward a sense of vulnerability. My wife and I also had our first child at this time, and we also moved house at this time and took on a mortgage. And I think a prouder version of me would like to say that it was water off a duck's back, but the honest version has to say and recognise that all these things presented challenges to me. You see, I think that often our motives are mixed, but I had a period in my life where I was quite sure of myself as a Christian, or at least I seemed to be, and I was quite sure of where I thought I was going. I was building up a lot of strength and wisdom and Bible knowledge through my studies, and I think that was all great, but from time to time the Babel Allen popped up again. But the experience of all these changes coming together at the same time humbled me and put me in a position of weakness once again. And it has been really helpful for me, because I do need reminded along the way in life that Jesus is Lord, and it's certainly not Alan Guy. So I found myself coming to the Lord in prayer in a more personal way. I found the Bible coming alive again to me in a way that it hadn't for a while. I found I was reading theology, and it seemed to strike more of a chord with me. It seemed to affect me at an emotional level in a way that I hadn't been doing for a while, because I think for a long time I was reading the Bible and theology, and yes, I was doing it devotionally, and it was all great, but at times it could be slightly detached from my life, because I was reading to argue in an essay, or to prepare a sermon, or to say something at church, or to win an argument with somebody, or something like that. And a wise man at my old church said to me, when you finish Bible college, what will happen is you'll start to read the Bible for yourself again, and you'll see it afresh. And I think that's what happened, but it really happened in a kind of more profound way when I was weakened in these circumstances. And that's really why for me it's crucial to keep the message of the cross close to my heart. It's a message that presents me with the full extent of human sin, especially mine. It's the message that reminds me that with all our strength and wisdom, the best we could do with God when He showed up was to hang Him on a cross. And it's the message that reminds me that sin deserves to be judged, and it deserves to be condemned. But actually it's from that position of hopelessness and defeat, both in Christ and human defeat, that there is a strength that opens up through faith in what he's done. And I think that applies to so many areas of my life. So that's been my encounters with God through weakness, and I hope perhaps that may help other people.
Thank you, Alan, for sharing with us your experiences of God. Here now to finish is an excerpt from a song sung by Robin Mark, telling of the freedom Christ brings when we commit our lives to him.
My chains are